Hi, everybody. I recently lost a horse I'd had for 30 years. Had become a good friend, and I wrote a short story. I fictionalized it, so it is fiction, but it was to help me get out the grief from losing my old friend. And it's called Goodbye, Old Friend. I was awakened around 6 a.m. as Grandpa went out the back door and toward the barn. He was headed to check on his old horse. Well, our old horse by now. He'd had this horse for 32 years, and needless to say, a strong bond had grown between them over time. I could hear Amigo nicker as Grandpa entered the barn. "And a good morning to you, old boy," Grandpa responded lovingly. It was 1938, and I was 12 years old. Grandpa had gotten Amigo as a yearling, way before I was born. Now it was really concerning to Grandpa that his old friend had begun falling for no apparent reason, except age. He had always been taken good care of, but in spite of that, he was slowly losing his battle with age. Amigo was a big, beautiful Tennessee walking horse standing 16'2" hands high and weighing around 1,400 pounds. His enormous size was beginning to work against him, as he often struggled to stay upright. He'd already taken down 2 fences and dented the barn walls in several places where he'd fallen. We all knew the old boy's quality of life was diminishing, and his falling was posing a threat to us, the other horses, and himself. And if he fell at night and couldn't get up with coyotes around, Grandpa was facing a growing sense of urgency. We knew that old Amigo wasn't long for this world, and it was breaking all our hearts, especially Grandpa's. I could feel it. It was palpable and very obvious because it often kept Grandpa distracted from his work lately. And that wasn't like Grandpa at all. My grandparents had gotten Amigo just months before Grandma got sick and passed away from cancer. We buried her on the farm she loved so much on a cold February afternoon. I'll never forget seeing Amigo walk over and stand beside Grandpa. He just stood quietly, looking down at the grave site throughout the entire service, then walked away with the rest of us. Grandpa called us all together one evening after supper and declared we'd all be helping dig Amigo's grave. So, every afternoon after our work day was done, we dug for what seemed like months. It takes both time and teamwork to dig a grave of that size with shovels. We'd all shared years of joy with Amigo. Now we'd spend some time preparing for a proper send-off. After all, Grandpa stated emphatically, he deserves it. We certainly all felt the same. Once word got around our area of what we were dealing with, neighbors and friends started showing up unannounced with shovels in hand. Some of them we hadn't spoken to in quite a while. It was wonderful to see folks showing their concern and offering help during this trying time. We often talked about the good times we'd had with Amigo as we dug. Other times we worked in solemn silence, and more than once I glanced to see a tear form in the corner of Grandpa's eye, spill onto his cheek, and drip onto the freshly dug dirt that was to be Amigo's grave. That grave seemed to belong to all of us, since we knew we were closing a chapter in all our lives. We were a collective and cohesive unit, united by a common love for Amigo as he had lived, and now we shared a common responsibility as he neared the end of his life. We all felt the gravity of the task now at hand. We moved the other horses to another field where they couldn't see us digging. Horses are extremely curious animals and have a strong herd mentality. They'd probably sensed that something was amiss, We didn't want them seeing all this, since they'd have enough to deal with once they realized Amigo was gone. We dug and dug as we all felt a harsh reality attached to this grave. We had to gradually slope one end and dig deeper as we went further into it. He was a big animal, which meant it had to be deep and wide. And knowing Grandpa, it would be plenty deep and plenty wide. He wanted his old friend to rest comfortably in the afterlife. He had taken care of him in this life, and now he was making provisions for the next one. Our family had worked together toward a common goal, albeit a sad one, and it had brought us even closer together. Then, one morning, Grandpa declared the grave finished. Suddenly, it seemed that digging the grave had been the easiest part in the scheme of things. The next step was both necessary and dreaded. Our common purpose must now take a new direction, one of finality. We must now take the final step in this heartbreaking endeavor. Each day when I visited Amigo, I could see his eyes were slowly losing their luster. He was tired, and I could tell. I would brush him as I talked to him. I don't know exactly how much horses know about what's being said to them, but I told him a lot. I told him how much I'd always appreciated him for his gentle nature. I told him that I was sorry his health was failing. I told him this would be for the best. I think I was mostly trying to convince myself. I'll never forget and always remember the morning he left us. Grandpa had found him down in the barn again, and as usual, he was having trouble getting up. Grandpa's eyes were moist as he joined us at the breakfast table. We all knew this was the morning. No one said a word as we slowly and deliberately finished breakfast. We didn't want to rush the inevitable. And anyway, there was nothing left to be said and lots left to be done. As we helped clear the table after breakfast, Grandpa looked at me and said simply, "Son, put the good halter and lead line on Amigo and take him to his spot. I'll be waiting there. And you young'uns stay in the house till I come back. We've all said our goodbyes to Amigo," he concluded in a sad voice. Amigo nickered his familiar greeting as I entered the barn. I can't say that he knew, but I certainly did. Doing something this difficult must be what it feels like to be a man, I concluded. This was about the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. My feet felt as heavy as lead, and I certainly did not want to move forward, but I did. And as I put his halter on him, he laid his big old tired head up on my shoulder and looked at me with his soft brown eyes. That did it. My eyes became cloudy with a chance for rain. I began weeping uncontrollably. It took a few minutes, but I got his halter on him. He looked at me then with expectancy. He thought we were going on another one of our bareback rides, but I knew better. He and I had galloped over these surrounding fields many times, but we wouldn't be doing that today. As we left the barn, he and I stopped and looked over those fields together one last time. He was remembering all those rides as he looked through tired old eyes. Then he turned to me and actually nudged me, as if to remind me of the task at hand. His touch brought me back to reality, the reality of our purpose that day. I began leading him to his final resting place, a grave that the entire family who loved him had dug together. It's funny sometimes the way a common goal, coupled with good intentions, can bring people together. Even, and maybe especially when, it's a heartbreaking event like this one. He slowly followed me as I led him to Grandpa, who was waiting by the grave. I could tell that he'd been crying, but then we all had. Grandpa took the lead line and looked Amigo lovingly in the eyes as he began, "Well, old boy, I reckon this is it. I counted on you to be gentle with my young'uns, and now my grand-young'uns. And you always were. Now I'm going to be as gentle with you. We've been through a lot, you and me. We loved you here, and now we're sending you home with love. Goodbye, old friend." Grandpa then turned to me and said, "You'd best go back to the house now, son." As I slowly walked away, I could see Grandpa lead Amigo down into his grave. I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. I needed to stop and throw up, but I needed to get away from there even more. I was almost back down at the barn when the shot rang out. I dropped to my knees and all pretenses were off. I wept like a baby. And I'm not the least bit ashamed of it either. I cried and cried. I cried all I needed to. And I learned that day that the road from boy to man is sometimes paved with tears. I would like to thank you for dropping by. It helped me to write about it. I hope it helped you in some way if you've ever lost a loved one. And please listen to some of our other stories if you would. We have 6 others on YouTube. And I hope you have a wonderful day.